This is one of those sermons I just feel like I should take a deep breath and warn you. It's when I feel like I should have given you a crash helmet when you walked through the door today, because today it's all about social justice. It is actually entitled The Beloved Community, but it's about justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, which is our second principle. This is one that will delve into matters of, I got it, it's good, thanks. I've got it. Life and death, sex and bodies, grace and evil, love and justice. So, David, are you ready?
Oh,
Are you ready for social justice?
oh boy, yes.
Life and death, sex and bodies, grace and evil, love and justice.
Get my attention.
Okay. You might remember that earlier in the year we explored the first principle and established that pillar that humanity, all the universe, everything is good. That inherent worth and dignity is our first principle. And I actually made a little handout for you. Do you remember I told you it's kind of like an arch, and there's the first principle on one side of the arch, and then there's the seventh principle, the other side of the arch, that all the universe, everything is interconnected, interrelated, interdependent, and that the fourth principle is the keystone of the arch, that we affirm the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. That's why we have the free pulpit. The free pulpit that says whoever speaks here speaks from their social location, from their shoes, and whoever listens gets to listen freely. It's not that whoever speaks here is saying something that has to be believed by everyone in the room. It's what they believe, right? And so it's about freedom in this space. So our fourth principle is also very important. So I did find that graphic I was telling you about. This graphic is called Principles as Pillars, and it's from my colleagues, Reverend Barbara and Jocko Tenhove, who serve Cedars Unitarian Church on Bainbridge Island, actually. So I wanted to point that out to you. But our second principle is this. Unitarian Universalists affirm justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. So we're going to go over each of those, and we're also going to talk about evil, because that's why we stand in such urgent need of justice, equity, and compassion. And we can't have a conversation about all of that stuff without talking about grace. So we're going to look at a particular topic to kind of get into this subject, and that would be reproductive justice. It's our particular focus for examining this principle. So I just want to check in. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So you might remember I told you about a story a long time ago about the Unitarian leader Lucy Stone, who was the morning star of the women's rights movement in this country. She spoke at Seneca Falls and some things like that. And how early in her life she was just completely opposed to the institution of marriage because she thought it was patriarchal and it was going to take away her rights as a human being. It would completely subvert her to her husband. She would not be able to own property in her own name. She would not be able to make choices about her own sexuality and so on. Although eventually, you probably heard, she did actually marry. She and Henry Blackwell chose to get married, and when they married, they made it a public statement about equality within marriage. So I mention her because this is a little bit of our context, our backstory. Social justice and human rights have been, for women in particular, but for all people, have been a long part of our living tradition. And it has been a long and bumpy road that we are walking from the days of Lucy Stone to today. And I'm sure you can imagine we still have far to go. Remember last month how 2 high school football players were convicted of raping a 16-year-old girl? A conviction that probably would never have happened if they hadn't taken pictures of themselves while they did this act and acts and posted them on social media. Then, to make matters more interesting, pundits reporting on the conviction sympathized with the attackers, bemoaning the tragic effect the conviction will have on their young lives. Meanwhile, the victim's name was illegally released by at least two media outlets, and she has received death threats on Twitter. And 40 years ago, the United States Supreme Court interpreted constitutional rights to due process and privacy for women and said that these establish a legal right to abortion. The case that became Roe versus Wade started in Dallas, Texas, with several young attorneys who wanted to challenge existing anti-abortion laws in that state. One of them, Linda Coffey, thought that she might find some possible plaintiffs at her congregation, First Unitarian Church of Dallas, which had a strong reputation in the community as being on the cutting edge of social reform. Does that remind you of anything?
What?
40 years ago.
Oh.
While Coffey didn't find plaintiffs there, she did find a group of strong supporters in the Women's Alliance who kind of came around one of the lead attorneys and became her sort of social support, her place that she could go to and get blankets and brandy and tea and sympathy when she was going through the whole Supreme Court process. And that was for Sarah Weddington, the lead attorney, as the case that became Roe versus Wade made its way through the Texas legal system and then eventually to the Supreme Court. So the rest is history, right? Well, while Roe may still be the law of the land, abortion opponents have made accessing abortion exceedingly difficult. Some states have only one abortion provider in the entire state. Some require a 24-hour waiting period. So imagine you're a woman who has to drive from rural whatever town all the way to another part of the state, make an appointment, spend the night, come back the next day. I mean, we're talking about a hotel stay, we're talking about gas money, we're talking about taking time off of work. The North Dakota state legislature voted in March to advance the most extreme abortion ban in the country, which would take the vast majority of abortions. It would make them illegal after the point which a fetal heart tone can be detected. When can a fetal heart tone be detected? 6 weeks. How many of us who have had pregnancies knew that we were even pregnant at 6 weeks? So this is a ban that was also similar to one that was passed in Arkansas. Earlier in this winter, the last safe and legal medical clinic where a woman in Mississippi could receive an abortion was closed. And I want to mention too, if you have a friend or a family member, anybody who works as a healthcare provider in this area, you probably know firsthand the incredible persecution and personal stigma and the professional fear that they go through to be in this line of work. So there's fewer and fewer people who are even willing to be medical professionals, physicians who will provide abortion. And here's another statistic. The Guttmacher Institute reports that currently half of American women will have an unintended pregnancy and nearly 1/3 will have an abortion by the age of 45. And this is a very painful, personal, private decision, and it's very hard for many people. But it is something that affects nearly 1/3 of women who will have an abortion by the age of 45. And even though abortion is increasingly hard to access, it is especially so for low-income women and women in rural states. So this whole thing with abortion and how, even though it's legal, the law of the land, how it's been gradually and systematically undermined, it's part of this larger thing that's going on in our culture, I think. And there's something about our culture that promotes policing women's bodies, that thinks that women's bodies, it's okay to make laws about that, to sell women's bodies, to seize and exploit women's bodies, that promotes, enables, and condones the complete objectification of women. So it's easy, though, to see this wrongness. Well, maybe it's not easy. I don't know. It seems like it's all around us. But what I find is it's much harder to know what to do about it. Like these kids out in Steubenville, Ohio, what can I do about that? See, justice isn't just a pure abstract ideal floating out in space somewhere. I like to think of justice as more kind of like imagine like a little small town, like a little place where equity and compassion and grace and evil, they all live on the same streets. They all live at this crossroads, these little houses together. So let's go to equity's house first. Equity does not imply sameness. Equity deals with fairness. with treating everyone as possessing inherent worth and dignity. It involves making sure that everyone has enough, that everyone is considered, consulted, and honored, not only as the pie is cut, but as it is mixed in the bowl. Whatever kind of pie it is. Is it an economic pie? Is it a political pie? We gotta have everybody in the room right when we're mixing it in the bowl. So one of the dangerous side effects of privilege of any kind, but especially economic privilege, is that the privileged do not need to consider or consult or honor the people who are beyond their sight and embrace. So who speaks for the poor in the boardroom, the clubhouse, or on the stock exchange floor? Who speaks for women's reproductive justice when the laws are mainly made by men? That's equity. That's the concern. That's what's happening all the time in Equity's house. So continuing our little village where justice lives, there's a house on the other side of the tracks, so to speak. Let's call this Evil's house. Unitarian Universalists, when you talk about evil, they start doing this a little bit. I haven't seen any of that this morning, but I kind of like talking about evil. I think it's a good, hard word that says what it means. Simply put, evil is the wrongness in this world. That's my definition. You can have your own. I'm just saying that's mine. It's one that works for me. And there are at least two kinds of evil. One is called ontic evil. Ontic is from that Greek word to be. The kind of thing, what did you say, Shauna? It just happens. Okay? Ontic evil is the shit happens kinds of wrongness. Tsunamis that scour whole islands, the earthquake that toppled Port-au-Prince, the Category 5 hurricane that flooded the poor neighborhoods of New Orleans and the Mississippi Gulf Coast. This is ontic evil. The it happens kind of evil, or the other kind. But there's also another kind of evil. It's moral evil. And this is the kind of evil that the religious right is really interested in a particular way. They bring, or I should say maybe we, because I have the religious right in me as well. They're certainly in my family. They're in the people within the sphere of folks that I love. But the religious right, I've noticed, brings a hypersensitive focus on moral evil as a private, individual thought, attitude, or action. But liberal religious folk tend to care about that. Some, but we tend to have more of a concern of moral evil as it is expressed in communal ways, as it becomes lived out in the common life of the whole community. We tend to be more concerned about moral evil as it becomes entrenched in our social institutions, such as healthcare, housing, government, education. And I understand last week you heard about how it gets entrenched in our criminal justice system. Moral evil as expressed as racism. And when I talked about Port-au-Prince and New Orleans and those natural disasters, I could have said, and maybe you went there, that the moral evil there is the way there's an ontic evil, right? But there's also a moral evil in the way that poor communities are disproportionately affected by natural disasters because of factors like environmental degradation and systemic racism. All of these isms, sexism, racism, ageism, ableism, heteronormativity, and so on, they are all moral wrongs that have a social component, and they offend our sense of justice. They undermine the wholeness of people and communities. My grandfather, a white Baptist preacher and racial justice advocate from the 1940s on, used to say that the opposite of poverty isn't riches. The opposite of poverty is community. It's beloved community. It's social justice. It's a place where people can live with wholeness, where they are treated with justice, equity, and compassion, and they have inherent worth and dignity. Perhaps because I am tuned into popular culture, probably way too much, and I actually love it, I'm especially concerned with how we have been treating women and girls lately. Don't even get me started about this last Academy Awards. I could go on and on. And were you astonished to learn that the high school boys in Steubenville, Ohio, had not been taught that it's wrong to have sex with someone who is unconscious? I know, we laugh because it hurts. The laugh it shows that it's painful for us. It got me to thinking, what do we teach our kids here on Vashon about this stuff? And when we can't even talk about these things, this is an injustice that tears at the fabric of beloved community between boys and girls, and children and adults, and women and men. It's far more than just reproductive justice for women. So, reproductive justice asks, what would it be like to live in a world where all people have the human right to parent when and how one desires to, and where every sexual relationship is a healthy one? So this is where we have to take a break from that evil. Oh, thank goodness, huh? And let's walk over and visit Grace's house. Grace. There's a great song by U2 by that name. I recommend it to you. It is the human ability to offer and receive love, compassion, and healing. Again, my definition, you can have your own, of course. So what would a healthy, grace-filled sexual relationship look like? According to Our Whole Lives, the Unitarian Universalist Association's comprehensive sexuality education curriculum, healthy sexual relationships have these characteristics. They're consensual. They're non-exploitative. They're mutually pleasurable. They're safe. They're developmentally appropriate to the age and maturity of the persons involved, and based on mutual expectations and caring. And finally, they're respectful. And that includes the value of honesty and keeping commitments that have been made to others. That's the definition, according to OWL, of a healthy sexual relationship. If you don't hear anything else, I want you to hear that. Reproductive justice lies at the heart, at the promise of human dignity, self-determination, and equality embodied in both the U.S. Constitution and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Justice, equity, and compassion is the second principle of the UUA, and the UUA has taken the struggle for reproductive justice as one of its 2 study and action issues through 2016. So we take these issues on and spend 4 years on them. And so we're just moving into that time now. The other study action issue that is going along at the same time is immigration justice. And there are many connections, many intersections, as you can imagine, between these issues. Our General Assembly first passed a statement supporting abortion rights in 1963. But now, our vision is bigger than merely affirming a woman's right to choose to end a pregnancy. Our vision of reproductive justice is grounded in a sense that our bodies and that sex is good. That's radical. How often do you hear that it's not? That it's bad, that it's shameful, that it's dirty, that it's awful, it's to be hidden away? I got ordained a Unitarian Universalist minister so I could stand up here and say that our bodies are good. It is a vision of community where people freely and responsibly search for truth and meaning together, tell the truth to our partners, our parents, and our children. We support responsible procreation, the widespread availability of contraception, access to prenatal care, to abortion care, to intentional parenting, as well as comprehensive sexuality education. So one thing about social justice, it starts at home. It's very personal. You know that old saying from the 60s, the personal is the political? It really is. So I say now, let's go to Compassion's house. I hope that this congregation makes its home right next door to Compassion. Compassion is that word that means feeling with So if someone else has something that is moving in their life, then I can feel with them. It is deeply listening to another. Compassion is this. When someone deeply listens to you, it is like holding out a dented cup you've had since childhood and watching it fill up with cold, fresh water. It is the capacity, compassion is the capacity to perceive and respond to what is true in another person's life. It is the capacity to feel brokenhearted when we hear about families being torn apart by immigration and customs enforcement. Compassion is the capacity to be outraged when a spouse is denied her military veterans partner's benefits, federal benefits under the so-called Defense of Marriage Act, because DOMA prevents the federal government from respecting the legal rights of same-sex couples. Compassion is not the impulse to fix another person. Rather, it is the desire to dwell with them where they live, to understand how it is with their life, to hear their story told in their own words, and from that, stand in solidarity with them, learn from them, and work toward justice. Compassion seeks first to be understood. Excuse me, got that backwards. Compassion seeks first to understand, then to be understood. Compassion is the bedrock of beloved community and is critical for social justice advocates. It is the seed of dissatisfaction that grows into outrage and blossoms into action when we hear that our children are given incomplete and inaccurate sexuality education from the media, their peers, and sometimes even from us. Is there anything we can do? Any one small thing that our mighty fellowship can do close to home, right here on the ground in Vashon Island, to create reproductive justice? Yes, there is. I have some ideas. Would you like to hear them? I wrote them down for you. Let's listen, first of all, let's listen deeply and compassionately to some people we don't spend enough time listening to, our youth. Next Sunday, our youth will lead this service. They'll be here at this spot, and they'll tell us what it's like to live life in their shoes. So please, let's show up for them. Let's support them, and let's give them our full attention. That's one thing. Let's do something else. Let's form a study action group on reproductive justice. Educate ourselves and ground ourselves in spiritual practice, and become like First Unitarian Dallas. And be known on this island. What the heck? Let them call us the Sex Ed Church. Wouldn't that be fun? Oh yeah, I know Sharon. She's a member of that Sex Ed Church. Sorry, Sharon. Let's offer comprehensive sexuality education that educates boys and girls compassionately about sex, that respects the whole person, honors the truth and diverse values, promotes the highest ethical values in human relationships. This curriculum already exists, and it's called OWL, Our Whole Lives, OWL. At the recent Religious Education Committee retreat, this is exactly what our religious education folks have decided to dream for this fellowship. They would like to offer OWL to every island youth who wants to have it. What a wonderful shared ministry, a public ministry for our community. If you want to get involved in some ways, there are many ways to get involved. Just talk to Indigo and she can talk to you about the particulars, or you can talk to me. It's going to take all of us in one little tiny way or another. So let's build beloved community this way. Let's practice justice, equity, and compassion in human relations this way. There are many ways to deepen our commitment into our second principle, and this is just one of them. But before we dive headfirst into any action, I would remind us again, social justice starts at home. Actually, it starts within. It starts within each person's heart. I think it starts with compassion toward the self. So when I do social justice work, I try to imagine the Bodhisattva Kuan Yin, the Buddhist figure who abides with humanity until all are restored to nirvana. She has a bottle she's holding. She has all the tears of the world that are being poured out into the ocean of suffering, and she cries along with us. She completely adores every single living thing. So to do social justice, I invite us to have a deep well to sustain ourselves. The goal is progress, not perfection. And I invite us to look at our fellowship's eyes and our individual selves' eyes. So, our individual selves through the loving eyes of Kuan Yin. Kuan Yin says, we are good. We are so good. We are precious and unique. And to quote the drag superstar RuPaul, if you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love someone else? Can I get an amen up in here? That's what she always says. Thank you. When we practice compassion toward ourselves, we don't give ourselves a hard time, hold ourselves to impossible standards, or drive to achieve. That's the path of burnout. Instead, walk the path of beloved community of justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. May it be so. And so for our time of meditation, I'd like to share a poem by Mary Oliver. This is the poem Wild Geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about your despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. May it be so.